The fluorescent lights flickered overhead in the precinct lobby, casting harsh, uneven shadows across a linoleum floor. Mariah Jenkins held her tote bag close, the hum of security cameras buzzing like static in her ears. She'd come to file a routine complaint, a simple review of officer conduct, something she did regularly as part of her job with the Civil Oversight Board. Yet from the moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Detective Aaron Holt leaned against a reception desk, arms crossed, a smirk curling over his lips. "Well, if it isn't the courthouse princess herself," he drawled, the words dripping with amusement. Mariah's heart thudded, not from fear, but the weight of recognition. She knew his type, the ones who thought their uniform granted immunity, the ones who believed a black woman couldn't hold authority over them. He chuckled, loud, hollow, as if the walls themselves endorsed his contempt. "Careful, ma'am. You wouldn't want to make trouble for yourself," he said, eyes narrowing. Mariah's hand tightened on her tote. She said nothing. She simply turned, heels clicking sharply against the tile, and left the lobby with a calm that belied the storm rising inside her. Holt's laughter followed her down the corridor, fading but not gone. He had no idea who she really was. The elevator doors slid shut. The sound of metal against metal echoed like a judgment. Mariah's phone buzzed in her pocket. An anonymous tip. Holt's record was worse than she imagined. And in that moment, as the city sirens wailed in the distance, Mariah realized something chilling. The game had just begun. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mariah Jenkins pushed open the precinct doors. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint musk of leather and sweat, settling into her chest like a weight. Behind the reception desk, Detective Aaron Holt leaned back, arms crossed, smirk in place. "Well, if it isn't the courthouse princess herself," he said, voice thick with amusement. Mariah's lips pressed into a straight line. She set her tote bag on the counter, fingers brushing against the strap for a moment before letting go. "Detective Holt," she said evenly, "I'm here to file a review." Holt chuckled, loud enough to make the other officers glance up. "Careful, ma'am. You wouldn't want to make trouble for yourself." His eyes glinted like a predator's. Mariah's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to do my job." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret with the room. "Your job, huh? Making calls about me? Funny how bold you get, all dressed up in your little board suit." She met his gaze without flinching. Every instinct screamed to defend, to argue. But Mariah had learned early that restraint could be sharper than rage. She slid her tote onto her shoulder. "I'm done here." The smirk faltered for a heartbeat. Holt laughed again, this time louder, more hollow. The sound bounced off the walls, a public display meant to unsettle. The officers nearby shifted in their chairs, eyes darting between Mariah and Holt. No one intervened. The air was thick with complicity. Mariah turned, heels clicking sharply against the tile, each step measured, deliberate. Holt's laughter chased her down the hallway, fading but not gone. At the elevator, she paused, phone in hand. A notification blinked on the screen, an anonymous tip. Holt's record was far worse than anyone realized. Her fingers tightened around the device. "Funny how bold you get," she whispered under her breath. Not at him, but at the storm she was about to unleash. The door slid shut, cutting off the fluorescent-lit lobby. The sound of metal against metal echoed, hollow and cold. Mariah's reflection stared back at her in the elevator's mirrored walls, calm, resolute, and dangerous in its silence. Outside, the city roared with sirens, horns, and distant shouts. Inside, a single thought pulsed in her mind. Holt had no idea who he'd just crossed. And as the elevator descended, Mariah felt the first true surge of anticipation. The reckoning was coming. Mariah stepped into her apartment, shutting the door against the city's late afternoon chaos. Horns honked in the distance. Construction clanged somewhere on the street, and the faint hum of a neighbor's TV seeped through the walls. She leaned her tote against the couch and sank into the cushions, letting her mind replay the precinct scene. Holt smirked, that hollow laugh, the way the officers didn't lift a finger. It all threaded together into a quiet, simmering fury. Her laptop opened with a soft click, notifications blinking like impatient eyes. Mariah typed Holt's name into the internal board database, watching the screen load his history. Complaints dismissed, reprimands never logged properly, internal investigations that went nowhere. Pattern, she muttered to herself, eyes scanning each document. Small infractions covered by larger infractions, all buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Microaggressions, abuse of power, and occasional blatant threat, all treated as nothing more than clerical anomalies. Her phone buzzed, snapping her attention. It was Tanya, a fellow board member. "Mariah, be careful." Tanya's voice said immediately when she picked up, "Holt has a reputation. Not the kind that just ruins your day. He ruins careers." "I know what I'm walking into," Mariah replied evenly. She closed her laptop for a moment, resting her forehead in her hands. "But he underestimated me today. That smirk? He thought I was intimidated. He has no idea who I am outside that lobby." Tanya hesitated. "Just don't let the retaliation get to you. People have tried taking him down before. Most of them end up burned." "I've been burned before," Mariah said quietly, voice flat, then sharper, "but that doesn't mean I stopped trying." She hung up and reopened the laptop, diving deeper. Each document painted the same picture. Holt wielding power like a blunt instrument, colleagues turning blind eyes, victims' voices muted by procedure. Mariah's fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing records, dates, and statements. She paused at a file labeled Anonymous Tip, Holt Misconduct. Her breath hitched as she read through it. Internal reports that had never made it to board, complaints that vanished into the precinct's filing system, security footage inconsistencies. A cold knot of anticipation and rage settled in her stomach. She knew then that Holt's public persona, clean, heroic, a community protector, was a mask. The real man thrived in the shadows, preying on fear, exploiting trust, and hiding behind uniforms and procedure. Mariah leaned back, letting the chair tilt slightly. She considered her next move. Filing another review was a first step. But this time, she needed more than paperwork. Witnesses, documented misconduct, corroborated timelines. Everything needed to be airtight. She had to expose him without leaving a single thread that could unravel her. Her phone vibrated again. Another tip, this one anonymous and urgent. Holt had a disciplinary record that stretched back years, carefully concealed. If she acted strategically, Mariah realized she could dismantle the carefully constructed narrative that protected him. Yet even as she planned, doubt crept in, not about her courage, but about the system. Could it withstand the truth? Could the board, the media, and the public handle the magnitude of exposure? She could feel the weight of potential consequences pressing down on her, but it didn't bend her resolve. Her apartment felt smaller now, the shadows of the late afternoon stretching long across the walls. She imagined Holt laughing, as he had in the precinct, believing the game was his to win. Mariah whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "Not this time." The city's sirens continued, fading in and out like the pulse of a restless heartbeat. Mariah's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to assemble the first piece of evidence, ready to step fully into a storm she had long prepared for. She paused to take a deep breath. Calm, deliberate, strategic, her own weapon against the chaos of unchecked authority. Holt's smirk flashed in her mind again, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, sharp smile. The reckoning wasn't just coming. It was already in motion. Mariah sat on her balcony, the city sprawling beneath her in streaks of amber and neon. The evening traffic hummed like a distant river, punctuated by sirens and shouting. She clicked on the local news live stream and froze. There he was, Detective Aaron Holt, polished uniform, gleaming badge, standing in front of flashing cameras. And thanks to Officer Holt's quick action, the suspect is safely in custody, the reporter said, smiling, eyes bright with admiration. Holt nodded, that same self-satisfied tilt his head Mariah had seen in the precinct. To the public, he was flawless. Hero, protector, model officer. Nothing hinted at the shadow behind the badge. "Bullshit," Mariah muttered, slumping back in her chair. She had seen the records, the internal complaints, the whispered warnings from colleagues. The contrast between public adoration and private abuse made her jaw ache with frustration. Her phone buzzed. It was Malik, a community liaison, and an old friend from oversight work. "You watching?" he asked, voice low. "I can't believe they're praising him again. People are blind." "I know," she replied, fingers tapping her phone. "He's a master at hiding behind the mask. But every mask slips eventually." They spoke for a while, discussing discrepancies she had noticed, witness statements ignored, evidence mishandled, disciplinary files quietly shelved. Every detail bolstered her growing sense that the system itself was complicit. "Just be careful," Malik said finally. "You going after him alone? People underestimate how vindictive he can be." Mariah inhaled slowly, the city air thick with exhaust and anticipation. "I'm not alone," she said, more to herself than to him. "I have the records. I have the witnesses. I know the board. And I know what he fears most: exposure." After the call, she opened her laptop again, scrolling through public archives and social media feeds. Holt's heroism dominated posts and headlines, masking the subtler abuses. Officers quietly followed his lead, civilians intimidated into silence, colleagues who whispered warnings instead of intervening. Every praise-filled headline was a layer of complicity, a shield against accountability. Her reflection in the laptop screen caught her attention. Eyes focused, lips pressed in determination. She remembered Holt's smirk, that hollow, condescending laugh in the precinct. It had been a challenge, a test he thought she'd fail. But Mariah knew now. The real test wasn't in public confrontation. It was in persistence, patience, and planning. The phone buzzed again, a tip from another board member. Holt had just received commendation paperwork for his public performance. A subtle twist of fate. Mariah made notes. Files to request, witnesses to contact, inconsistencies to expose. Each step measured, deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle she was assembling in secret. Her apartment felt smaller as she worked. Shadows stretched long across the walls, mirroring the looming shadow of Holt's influence over the precinct, the media, and public perception. She imagined the officers around him, heads bowed to his charisma, unaware or unwilling to see the harm beneath it. Mariah's hands hovered over the keyboard. Each keystroke would become a calculated ripple, challenging the carefully constructed illusion. She thought of the community, the victims, the silent observers who feared reprisal. "They deserve the truth," she whispered, voice firm and unwavering. The news stream continued in the background, Holt smiling, shaking hands, cameras capturing every heroic gesture. But Mariah no longer saw the performance. She saw the pattern, the orchestration, the mask that would eventually slip under the weight of evidence and exposure. And in that moment, she understood the stakes. Public perception was fragile, the system flawed, and Holt's influence widespread, but not unbreakable. Her strategy would have to be flawless. Every interview, every report, every witness statement would count. Mariah leaned back, taking a slow breath. Calm, focused, ready. The city hummed beneath her, oblivious to the storm gathering in the quiet corners of bureaucracy and shadowed hallways. Holt's mask was strong, but Mariah's resolve was stronger. And soon, she thought, the world would see the man behind the badge. The conference room smelled of old coffee and varnish. Mariah adjusted her blazer as she stepped inside, eyes scanning the space. Holt was already there, leaning casually against a table, fingers drumming an idle rhythm. His smirk was the same, cocky, dismissive, the kind of expression that assumed victory before the battle even began. "Mariah Jenkins," he said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "I wasn't expecting you to make it here so boldly." "I came as scheduled," Mariah replied evenly, setting her tote on the chair beside her. "We have a review to conduct." Holt laughed softly, a low, predatory sound. "Ah, yes. My favorite part of the job, listening to complaints from someone who clearly has nothing better to do." Mariah met his gaze without hesitation. "I have something better to do than turn a blind eye," she said. "And you have something worse to face than empty praise." His smirk faltered, just slightly. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You really think you can take me down with words?" "I don't think. I know," she said, pulling a file from her tote and placing it carefully on the table. Discrepancies in reports, complaints that disappeared, witness statements ignored. The documents speak for themselves. Holt raised an eyebrow, leaning over the table to glance at the file. Bold words, Ms. Jenkins. But words don't hold power. Actions do. Mariah's fingers hovered over the stack of papers. Then let's compare actions to words. She flipped open the first folder, sliding evidence across the table. Every page, every notation, every time-stamped record was a knife to the facade he had built. Holt's eyes flicked over them, and Mariah noticed a subtle tightening of his jaw. "So this is your version of courage?" he asked, voice lower, less certain. "Yes," Mariah said calmly. "Not courage. Accountability. You confuse the two because you've never had to answer to anyone before." The room grew heavier, the silence thick between their words. Holt's hands clenched slightly, though he didn't move from his spot. "You don't understand a precinct," he said finally, tone sharper. "You're a board member. You sit behind a desk. You think the rules apply to you." "They do," Mariah replied, steady as stone. "Even to you. That's the difference. Rules aren't suggestions, and masks eventually slip. You're running out of time." Holt's smirk returned, more brittle this time. "Time? You have no idea how long I've been untouchable. And yet here we are," she said softly, almost a whisper. "You forgot one thing. Someone's always watching. And this time I'm not alone." He leaned back, eyes narrowing, as if calculating the weight of her words. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "People like you, they get burned." Mariah shook her head. "Not burned. Seen. Heard. Remembered." She tapped the top of the file. "And the truth has a way of coming out, even when people like you try to bury it." Holt's hands unclenched slowly, tension running through his shoulders. The smugness was still there, but beneath it, Mariah could see the slightest crack, the fear of exposure. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to someone confronting him with proof rather than emotion. She rose from her chair, gathering her tote again. "I'll be filing a full report. The board will follow up, and everyone who's been ignored, silenced, or intimidated by you will finally have their voices heard." Holt remained seated, staring at the documents. "This isn't over," he said, voice lower now, almost a threat. "No," Mariah said. "It's just beginning." The conference room door clicked behind her as she left, heels echoing sharply on the linoleum. The hum of the precinct seemed louder somehow, filled with the unspoken tension of officers who watched silently, aware that the balance of power was shifting. Outside the room, the hallway stretched empty and fluorescent, the air cold against her skin. Mariah's phone buzzed, a text from Tanya. "Did you see the look on him?" She allowed herself a small, controlled smile. Holt had underestimated her, just as she had predicted, but the game was far from over. Every word, every document, every quiet confrontation was another move in a chess match he didn't realize he was playing. As she stepped into the elevator, Mariah took a slow breath. Calm, deliberate, strategic. Holt may have thought he held all the cards, but she knew the real power lay in persistence, patience, and truth. The door slid shut, and the sound of metal against metal echoed like a heartbeat. Outside, the city's chaos continued, but inside Mariah, the storm was already gathering, silent, methodical, and unstoppable. Mariah's phone buzzed relentlessly the next morning. Notifications, emails, messages, all signs of subtle storm brewing. She ignored most of them while sipping black coffee, eyes scanning her inbox for anything relevant to Holt. Then she noticed it. A thinly veiled email from an anonymous precinct account. "Careful. Some lines are dangerous to cross." Her stomach tightened, but she refused to let it show. She typed a measured reply. "I'm not crossing lines. I'm ensuring they are followed." By mid-morning, the first whispers began at the oversight office. Colleagues glanced at her differently, hushed conversations, stopping abruptly when she approached. She overheard one mention of Holt, the tone careful, almost fearful. "Watch your step around him. He's vindictive." At lunch, Malik called. "You getting these rumors too?" he asked, voice low, wary. "Yes," Mariah replied, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. "He's trying to intimidate me, spread fear. but it won't work. People around him are scared, Mariah. That makes this tricky. I know, she said, swallowing hard. I've dealt with fear before. This is just another layer. By mid-afternoon, the retaliation escalated. A fellow board member approached her cautiously. Mariah, just so you know, Holt's making waves. Social media posts, precinct chatter. He's trying to discredit you. People are talking. Mariah didn't flinch. Let them talk, she said quietly, voice steady. Holt's power relies on silence and fear. He can't stand exposure. That's exactly what I intend to give him. But even as she spoke, the emotional weight pressed down. She could feel it in small ways. A colleague avoiding eye contact, a delivery at her apartment left in the hallway instead of at the door, the lingering presence of a car idling outside her building. Holt's retaliation was precise, subtle, the kind that left no fingerprints but spoke volumes. Intimidation masquerading as coincidence, harassment dressed in procedural neutralities. Mariah knew he was testing her, looking for cracks. Later that evening, Mariah met Tanya in a quiet cafe. The clatter of cups and low hum of conversation felt distant, as if she were watching from behind glass. He's escalating, Tanya said, voice low. You've seen it, right? I have, Mariah replied, and I expected it. It won't stop me, but it's here. Every move he makes is designed to unsettle me. Tanya frowned. Even at home, the texts, the cars outside. Mariah nodded, eyes focused. He knows fear is effective, but I've trained myself to observe, not react, to anticipate, not retreat. This is chess, Tanya, and he thinks I'm playing checkers. A waitress set down their coffees. Mariah's hands remained folded around her cup, the warmth grounding her. She imagined Holt back at the precinct, recounting the conference room confrontation to colleagues, embellishing, twisting, trying to regain his sense of control. The irony was sharp. The more he tried, the more evidence of his insecurity she gathered. Don't get me wrong, Mariah said finally, her voice calm but edged. The retaliation hurts. It's invasive, exhausting. But every move he makes, every whisper, every rumor, every shadow, only proves the pattern I've been documenting. It all builds to the point where he can't hide it anymore. Tanya reached across the table, gripping her hand. I just don't want to see you hurt. Mariah smiled, thin but resolute. Hurt is inevitable when you challenge systemic power. The trick is to control it, use it, channel it. He's playing with fire, and I intend to let him burn through his own arrogance. The conversation ended, but the tension followed her home. Sirens echoed in the distance, the city alive with chaos that mirrored her own unease. She double-checked locks, scanned emails for anomalies, noted every odd detail. Holt's retaliation was not blunt. It was surgical, personal, a psychological minefield. Yet beneath the anxiety, beneath the sleepless nights and the constant hum of vigilance, Mariah felt the quiet strength of certainty. Holt's pride, his smirk, his need to dominate. They were all vulnerable to one unyielding force, truth. And as she prepared for the next day, reviewing her notes and plotting her next moves, she allowed herself a small thought. The reckoning wasn't just coming. It was building momentum, and Holt had no idea how unstoppable it was about to become. Mariah sat at her desk, paper spread like a map of calculated strategy. Every file, email, and note was a piece of Holt's story. The hidden one, the one no one publicly acknowledged. Her fingers tapped the keyboard with deliberate patience, cross-referencing witness statements, internal reports, and video logs. Tanya leaned over her shoulder, voice low. You really think we can put all of this together without someone noticing? Mariah didn't look up. We have to. Every detail matters. A single oversight, and Holt could spin it into doubt. We're not just exposing him. We're showing the system that allowed him to thrive unchecked. Tanya nodded but remained tense. He's already retaliating. I don't want you caught off guard. I'm not going to be caught off guard, Mariah replied firmly, eyes scanning a folder labeled witness testimonies. One name stood out. Officer Rivera, a young cop who had seen Holt intimidate civilians during a traffic stop last year. They arranged a discreet meeting. Rivera's hands trembled as she slid into the booth across from Mariah at a quiet diner. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I can't keep covering for him anymore. Tell me everything," Mariah urged gently. "Every interaction, every order, every time you saw him abuse his authority." Rivera hesitated, swallowing. He's clever, makes it look normal. But I've seen him threaten civilians, bend rules, manipulate evidence. He even got other officers to stay quiet. I thought it was just me noticing, but it's bigger. Mariah nodded, jotting down notes. "You're not alone, and your testimony will be protected. This is bigger than one officer. It's systemic, but it starts with your truth." Rivera exhaled, relief mingled with fear. Okay, I'll tell you everything." Over the next few days, Mariah compiled additional statements. Anonymous emails from clerks who had watched complaints vanish, text messages from civilians coerced into silence, video evidence from routine precinct cameras showing Holt's missteps. Each fragment of truth added weight, a quiet indictment building into a dam ready to break. At the oversight office, Mariah and Tanya reviewed the evidence with meticulous care. "If we present this, there's no spin he can use," Tanya said, fingers tracing a timeline on a whiteboard. "Not just present," Mariah replied. "We need to construct a narrative the public can't ignore. Patterns, timelines, corroboration. Every piece reinforces the other." They debated strategy for hours, discussing the safest way to gather more information without tipping Holt off. They planned confidential interviews with other officers, compiled records from prior incidents, and mapped connections between complaints and ignored procedures. Every conversation, every step, was measured for maximum impact. That evening, Mariah returned home exhausted but focused. She reviewed footage of Holt at a traffic stop, comparing it to written complaints. Each inconsistency became a thread, unraveling the illusion he had carefully cultivated. She watched him give a civilian a stern lecture, tone unnecessarily harsh, then saw another officer defer silently, unwilling to intervene. The camera angle betrayed every subtle intimidation tactic. Her phone buzzed again, an encrypted message from an anonymous whistleblower inside the precinct. "He knows you're building a case. Be careful. Evidence is key, but so is timing." Mariah typed a quick reply. "Understood. Timing is everything. Thank you." She paused, staring at the city skyline through her apartment window. Holt's influence was real, pervasive, and dangerous. But she had seen the cracks in his mask, the moments when his smirk faltered, the subtle signs of insecurity. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his false persona. Malik called that night. "How's the collection going?" "Better than expected," Mariah said. "We're compiling enough to make a clear, undeniable case. Holt's power relies on perception and fear. Once we show the truth, perception can't save him." "And retaliation?" Malik asked. "Persistent, subtle," she admitted. "He's trying to rattle me, but every attempt is giving me more insight. I'm learning his methods as I gather the proof. I can anticipate his next moves." The call ended, and Mariah returned to her files. Her apartment was quiet, shadows stretching long in the lamplight. Each piece of evidence was more than documentation. It was a shield, a weapon, and a statement. Holt's arrogance had blinded him to the inevitability of exposure, and Mariah intended to use every resource at her disposal. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes, and whispered, "Soon, the mask comes off. Every lie, every silence, every victim ignored, the world will see." Her resolve was absolute. Holt's retaliation, the fear, the pressure, it was all a prelude to what was coming. Evidence was rising, like a tide, unstoppable, carrying with the weight of truth and justice. And Mariah knew with clarity that once the tide broke, there would be no turning back for him, for her, or for the system he thought he controlled. The City Hall meeting room was packed. Media cameras lined perimeter, microphones poised, and community members whispered anxiously among themselves. Mariah Jenkins stepped up to the podium, file in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. Somewhere in the room, Holt sat, smug as ever, assuming the performance would protect him. "You're not going to enjoy this," he whispered under his breath to the colleague beside him. Mariah ignored him, voice calm but firm. "Good evening." I am here as a representative of the Civil Oversight Board. We are tasked with reviewing conduct, ensuring accountability, and protecting the community's trust. Tonight, I am presenting evidence regarding Detective Aaron Holt's repeated misconduct. A murmur ran through the room. Holt's smirk faltered, though he tried to mask it with a casual lean in his chair. Mariah opened the first folder, placing copies of internal reports, timestamps, and witness statements on the podium. These documents reveal a pattern. Complaints dismissed, reports altered, officers intimidated, civilians silenced. Each record has been cross-checked, verified, and corroborated. This is not an isolated incident. It is systemic abuse of authority. Holt leaned forward, trying to interject. This is slander. Please, Mariah said, cutting him off, eyes locking on his. I have given this room irrefutable evidence. Your personal opinion does not negate documented facts. A reporter raised a hand. Detective Holt, your response? He opened his mouth but found no words strong enough to counter stacks of verified files, video logs, and eyewitness statements. His smirk wavered as murmurs filled the room, officers and citizens whispering in disbelief at the contrast between the public hero image and the documented reality. Mariah continued, flipping through pages. Witnesses report intimidation, harassment, and procedural violations. Officers corroborate seeing complaints ignored or erased. Video footage confirms actions inconsistent with protocol. Every claim has been substantiated. The evidence is overwhelming. Holt's voice, when it came, was low, defensive, sharp. This is a witch hunt. Fabricated. You're trying to ruin my career. Mariah's lips pressed into a thin line. You may feel threatened now, Detective Holt, but this is accountability. You've been given opportunities to correct your behavior. You have failed. The system, your colleagues, and the public have been denied justice. Tonight, they see the truth. A community member stood, voice trembling. I saw him threaten my brother over a traffic stop. We were afraid to speak. Thank you for giving us a voice. More voices followed. Quiet statements that grew louder, layering over Holt's attempt at composure. Each testimony chipped away at the aura he had carefully built. Each corroborated account, each piece of evidence, revealed a facade cracking. Holt's fists clenched on the chair arms. He glanced around, realizing the magnitude of exposure. The media cameras, community members, even officers seated silently. Everyone had seen him, and now they knew. Mariah placed the last folder down. Detective Holt, the investigation will continue under full board supervision. Internal Affairs has been notified. Any attempt to intimidate witnesses or conceal records will be documented and prosecuted. The public has a right to see their officers held to the law. This is the standard you failed to meet. The room erupted in whispers, flashes from cameras clicking rapidly. Holt's colleagues exchanged glances, some quietly nodding in agreement, others stiff and uncomfortable. The balance of power had shifted. Holt stood abruptly, voice tight, strained. You'll regret this. I'm untouchable. Mariah's gaze remained steady, unwavering. Not tonight. Not ever again. He turned and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed in the hushed chamber. The sound reverberated like a verdict. Malik approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. You did it. The tide shifted. People finally see him for what he is. Mariah exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders in slow release. It's not over, she said softly, eyes scanning community members who had braved their fear to speak. It never is, but it's a start. She watched as reporters pored over files, questioning officers, and capturing reactions from those who had been silenced for too long. Holt's massive heroism lay in pieces, scattered across the room, unrecognizable. A young officer whispered, half to herself, I didn't realize. Mariah nodded. None of us did. Not until we looked closely. Outside, sirens and city noise mingled with the fading tension of the room. She stepped away from the podium, heart still racing but mind clear. The reckoning had begun, and the system, messy, flawed, resistant, was finally facing its truths. Mariah allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had exposed the wrongdoing, held the powerful accountable, and given a voice to the silenced. But she knew the emotional cost was high, the ripple effects just beginning. As she left the hall, Holt's absence felt like a shadow, heavy and unfinished. Justice had been initiated, but the scars, personal, systemic, emotional, would linger. Mariah's reflection in the glass doors caught her attention. Calm, resolute, and aware of the weight she now carried, she whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Truth matters, even when it costs everything. The city roared around her, alive and indifferent. But for the first time, the balance of accountability had shifted. The precinct felt different the next morning. Even before Mariah walked through the doors, she sensed a shift. Officers exchanged quiet glances, whispers hanging in the air like smoke. The hubbub of authority had diminished. Holt's absence was felt like a vacuum, leaving both unease and opportunity in its wake. At the Civil Oversight Board office, Tanya greeted her with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's done," she said softly, "but it's going to get messy. Internal Affairs is reviewing everything, and the media coverage, it's intense." Mariah nodded, fingers running through her hair. I expected nothing less. Holt was never going to disappear quietly. The ripple effect is inevitable. Her phone buzzed. Another tip from an anonymous source. The message read simply, "Precinct morale is low. Officers are scared. The shift begins. Stay vigilant." Malik called shortly after, voice tense but upbeat. "You saw the headlines?" "Yeah," Mariah said. Holt's influence is collapsing publicly. Privately, the precinct is chaotic, but the system is moving. That's what matters. Malik hesitated. "It's just people underestimated how much this would hit him. I've seen officers terrified of speaking openly now. Some are leaving early, calling in sick. It's intense." "That's expected," she said. "Fear runs both ways. But truth will always outlast intimidation." Later that afternoon, she walked past the precinct entrance. The news vans were gone, leaving a few lingering reporters and curious passers-by. Holt's name dominated the local coverage. Detective under investigation for misconduct. City confronts officer accountability. Public trust tested. The headlines felt like small victories, but Mariah knew the battle was more than headlines. It was cultural, institutional, and slow. Inside, she checked her files. The evidence she had presented was now part of an official inquiry. Internal Affairs had begun interviews, confirming patterns she had uncovered. Officers who had stayed silent were now compelled to speak, their fear outweighed by procedure and legal obligation. She paused, staring at a photograph taped to her wall, a memory from her first day on the oversight board. Young, naive, determined. Now, she carried the weight of battles fought and victories earned, tempered by the cost of confrontation. Holt's downfall was undeniable, but her own life had shifted, too. Trust fractured, friendships tested, moments of fear she had carried quietly. A message popped up on her phone from a community member. "Thank you. We finally feel safe speaking up. You gave us a voice." Mariah allowed herself a small smile. Validation, fleeting but potent. It reminded her that the fight wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Every witness she had protected, every piece of evidence she had compiled, contributed to a broader truth. But even with the public victory, she couldn't ignore the emotional toll. Nights of vigilance, paranoia about retaliation, and the weight of responsibility had left marks. She felt fatigue in her bones, a constant on the back of her mind, reminding her that justice demanded resilience. Tanya joined her at the desk. Holt's suspension is official. Internal Affairs is moving forward, and his public reputation is destroyed. But Mariah, the ripple effects, people are reacting unpredictably. Be careful. "I know," Mariah said. "I've always known this wouldn't be neat. Justice rarely is. But it's real now, and that's what counts." A young officer she had quietly guided through the process approached, hesitating. I want to help. I want to do the right thing, even if it's scary." Mariah smiled softly. "You already are. Speaking up is never easy, but it's the first step toward accountability." Outside, the city moved on. Sirens, traffic, and chatter filled the streets, indifferent to the quiet victory unfolding inside the precinct walls. Mariah felt the weight of both triumph and lingering uncertainty. Holt's downfall was not cinematic revenge. It was systemic consequence, measured and deliberate. And yet, the emotional cost of navigating fear, retaliation, and societal complicity remained with her. As she left the board office that evening, the sky tinged with the last light of sunset, Mariah felt the duality of the moment. Justice had been served, but the battle against systemic abuse was ongoing. She had struck a blow, unmasked corruption, and protected the silenced, but she also carried the scars of vigilance, perseverance, and confrontation. Malik met her outside, hands in pockets. "You did it, Mariah." He's exposed. The city saw the truth. "I did my part," she replied, eyes on the horizon. "But the work never ends." That's the reality of fighting entrenched power. Malik nodded, understanding. Still to start. She inhaled deeply, letting the city's hum fill her senses. Holt's shadow had been lifted, the system confronted, and the community empowered. But the journey of accountability was ongoing, fragile, and fiercely necessary. For Mariah, the lesson was clear. Victories are temporary without vigilance. Truth is powerful but costly, and courage is measured not in moments, but in sustained resistance. And as she walked toward the subway, the sky darkening above, she allowed herself one small, resolute thought. The tide had shifted, and she would be ready for whatever came next. Mariah sat at her kitchen table, the late afternoon sunlight spilling across stacks of files and notes. The apartment felt quiet, almost unreal after the storm of the past weeks. She had exposed Holt, shifted the balance of power, and protected countless silenced voices. But the victory felt hollow in some ways. The emotional cost was heavy, invisible to the public. Her phone buzzed. It was Malik. "You okay?" he asked, voice cautious. "I am," she said, though her tone carried the weight of exhaustion. "Physically, yes. Mentally, it's a different story." "I can imagine," he said softly. "You've been under pressure for weeks, and for what you did, most people wouldn't have lasted." Mariah rubbed her temples. "It's not just me. The witnesses, the board members, the community, they've all carried pieces of this burden. I've just had to carry it visibly. And it changes you, you know? Being the one to stand against a system designed to protect the wrong people." Malik paused. "Do you regret it?" "No," she said immediately. "I don't. But I understand now that justice isn't clean. It leaves scars. Holt's gone through public disgrace, yes, but the emotional landscape, theirs, is layered and complicated. Triumph is never painless." Her reflection in the window caught her attention. Calm, poised, but with shadows beneath her eyes that the sunlight could not hide. She thought about the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the small moments of fear that still crept in when she walked past the precinct or saw a police car in her neighborhood. Later, Tanya stopped by, dropping off a folder. "Internal Affairs finalized their initial report," she said. "Holt is suspended indefinitely, under criminal review, and the board's recommendations are moving forward. The city is watching. People are talking." Mariah nodded, flipping through the report. The documentation was meticulous, the consequences clear, but she lingered on the human cost. The officers shaken, witnesses traumatized, herself forever changed. "Justice is a process, not an event," she murmured. Tanya placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've given them something they didn't have before, a voice, a chance to be heard. That matters." "I know," Mariah said, closing the folder, "but it doesn't erase the personal toll. There's a price to fighting entrenched power, and you pay it whether the system bends or breaks." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a young civilian. "Because of you, my family feels safe speaking up. Thank you." Mariah stared at the words, letting them sink in. Relief, pride, and sorrow intertwined. Justice had been served, yes, but only partially and only temporarily. Holt's removal from power didn't fix the system. It didn't erase past harm. It only proved that persistence, truth, and courage could make a dent. That evening, Malik met her at a quiet cafe. "You've been carrying this alone for too long," he said. "Take some time for yourself. You've earned it." "I know," Mariah said, sipping her tea. "But stepping away isn't simple. There's a network of people depending on accountability, And the city, it doesn't pause. Hope may be exposed, but the structures he exploited are still there. Then rest enough to keep going, Malik said gently. Even warriors need strength. Mariah smiled faintly. Rest, yes, that I can do. And reflection, understanding what it cost me and what it cost others. She paused, watching the sunlight shift across the cafe window. Victory is not about revenge. It's about integrity and resilience. That's what matters. That's what I fought for. She thought of Holt, stripped of his public heroism, facing scrutiny he had long evaded. She thought of the witnesses, finally able to speak without fear. She thought of herself, forever altered, carrying the scars of courage and vigilance. You did good, Malik said. All of it. Don't forget that. Mariah nodded, letting the weight of his words settle. Yes, there was pain, fatigue, and lingering tension, but there was also justice, moral clarity, and the knowledge that she had confronted entrenched power with integrity. The city hummed outside, indifferent yet alive with the ripple effect of her actions. Mariah exhaled slowly, feeling the first measure of peace in days. Holt's shadow was gone, yet she understood the truth. The fight for justice never truly ends. One victory simply prepares the ground for the next. She whispered to herself, resolute. The cost is high. The scars are real. But truth matters, and I'll carry it always. Months later, the city felt quieter but sharper, like a wound finally scabbed over but still tender. Mariah walked the streets in the early morning, the air crisp, the hum of traffic punctuated by distant sirens. Everything had changed. Precinct morale, public trust, Holt's career, but nothing had truly stopped. Systemic flaws remained, and the work of accountability was ongoing. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tanya. Board meeting tomorrow. New policies. Community review sessions. Mariah stared at the words, a mixture of fatigue and determination settling in her chest. The fight wasn't over. It had only shifted shape. She stopped at a small park, watching children play, and neighbors greet one another. In their laughter, she saw what she had been fighting for: safety, dignity, and the fragile courage to speak truth. Holt's downfall had created space for accountability, but it hadn't fixed everything. The city, the system, the human hearts involved, these were still fragile, still complicated. Malik joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You ever think about what it cost you? He asked gently. All the time, Mariah said, taking a slow sip. The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the fear, the emotional weight. It's not gone. I feel it in the quiet moments, in the tension that lingers when I pass the precinct or hear his name. The cost is part of the price of courage. Malik nodded, understanding. And worth it? Mariah considered the question, eyes tracing the movement of a family tossing a ball nearby. Yes, worth it. The victory is not just his exposure. It's the voices he silenced being heard. It's the truth prevailing, even if imperfectly. Worth it, even if the scars remain. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an officer who had testified. Thank you for protecting us, for holding him accountable. Mariah's fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. She typed back, Your courage made this possible. Remember that. She and Malik walked slowly through the park, the city waking around them. Mariah's mind revisited the months of meticulous planning, quiet confrontations, and strategic exposure. Each small action, the filing of reports, interviews with witnesses, cross-referencing evidence, had been a brick in the foundation of accountability. Holt had been unmasked, but the system remained fragile, requiring constant vigilance. You've changed it, Malik said softly, even if it's just a little. Mariah nodded. Yes, and yet the change is ongoing. Holt's fall is a symbol, not the end. Every officer, every citizen, every policy must continue to be scrutinized. Vigilance is the only way to protect progress. A gust of wind carried the faint echo of city noise, horns, sirens, chatter, construction. Mariah inhaled deeply, letting the sounds anchor her. The fight was never singular or complete. It was continuous, evolving, demanding courage and resilience. She had learned this firsthand. She thought of Holt, reduced to a cautionary tale, facing internal affairs, public scrutiny, and the quiet consequences of a career built on fear and deception. She thought of herself, carrying scars that no public victory could erase, but also carrying knowledge, skill, and unwavering resolve. A young girl ran past, laughing, her mother calling after her. Mariah smiled faintly, seeing in the child the innocence and courage that accountability sought to protect. Holt's exposure had created space for safety, dignity, and truth, but the work to preserve it would never end. Malik glanced at her. "You're ready for the next step?" Mariah exhaled, feeling the weight and clarity settle in her chest. "Always," she said, "because truth matters, even when it's difficult, even when it's costly, and someone has to carry it." They stood in silence for a moment, the city sprawling endlessly before them. Holt's shadow was gone, yet the echoes of his abuse lingered, subtle but instructive, a reminder of the vigilance required, the courage necessary, and fragility of trust. Mariah closed her eyes, letting the wind brush her face. The city, flawed and human, continued to move, and so would she, carrying the scars, the knowledge, and the truth forward, always ready to confront injustice again. Because accountability was never complete, but courage, persistence, and moral clarity could ensure that its echoes resonated far beyond a single victory. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, resolute. The fight continued, and she would be ready.